This is the ISG Digital Dish.
Welcome to the Digital Dish,
a podcast for women's voices and perspectives in the digital world. I'm Lois.
I'm Missy.
And I'm Jeannie. And we want to make sure smart women and their points of view were being heard. Welcome to Digital Dish 2022. Very exciting interview, panel discussion actually coming up. This is where our new co-host, Missy Lawrence-Johnston, has a conversation with Lois Coatney and Kimberly Tobias and Lisa Graver, and they talk about what do you have to do to start a Women in Digital group. So give it a listen. Listen to the end because they've got some great pointers, and then Lois and I will do a wrap-up for you.
My name is Missy Johnston, and today we're going to be talking about how to start a Women in Digital group. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves.
Sure. I'll go next. Lois Coatney, also part of the Digital Dish, and I'm with ISG and participated in starting the Women in Digital program for ISG.
And I'm also with ISG. I'm Kimberly Tobias, and I'm a guest today. And I've been with our firm for 18 years, and I am the program director over our Women in Digital program.
And I'm Lisa Graver, and I'm with LTI, although formerly with ISG. And I recently launched a LTI Women in Tech program within LTI globally. So I've been leaning heavily on my experiences with Lois and Kimberly, and they're starting up the program to start ours.
Bear with me if I mess things up. I'm going to try my best to just facilitate the conversation today, because this is something that we're always keenly aware of, but then don't always know how to talk about it. Should you talk about it? Ethnically, you can say things like, oh, you don't want to be race baiting, but are you like women baiting? Like there's this concept of, oh, are the women talking about women not having enough this and that, and then I don't know. So I think there's so much emotion that can get wrapped up into just women in tech, women in digital, whenever there's a group that needs uplifting and not to be marginalized. So that's the purpose of this conversation, is talking about women in digital. So I figured we would start with, Lois, what was your vision? Kimberly, how did you get roped in? And Lisa, what is it you want to do?
Well, it was funny because when you were talking about that, it reminded me of an ISG event, 3-4 years ago, something like that. And we were planning a lunch, and we wanted to do it for women who were at this event because, of course, like many events that are in technology, we always know that there's, at least 80 to 90% men and not very many women. And we're like, let's have, just during the lunch, like a place, for the women to go and, be able to have lunch together. And it was interesting because I got some feedback of, well, is it like a club? Like, is this like a women's club? Like men aren't allowed to participate? And then it kind of got me thinking, like, that wasn't the point. It was a point of, I don't know, we could talk about things that, what are you doing in your neck of the woods and so forth. But it was kind of like you were saying, when we first started this program, there was actually quite a bit of discussion of, is this just for women? Are only women allowed to be in this?
Right. Are you creating another division? If you want women's voices heard, why would you pull women away from having lunch during the time where they could be networking with men? I could understand that.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, just basic things is when, so I don't know if there was necessarily a vision, but it was more so of just starting to recognize that there are topics to talk about. We do need to put some time and energy into it. So who are the right people to do that and give women a chance to be leaders, right? Those who maybe wouldn't have had the exposure and the leadership, give them a chance to be leaders. But let's not just make this exclusively just for what women do. And so that was kind of how it started and morphed from there.
That's interesting. That's critical, that leadership expectation or leadership experience. I was reading something, about how women are less likely to be in leadership positions just because they have to take a break for family reasons at some point. So they're tracking along with men in tech, men in digital till about 30s, baby making, families, you're sandwiching your caregiving. And then you come back in and there's this gap of catching up, with just skills and expectations and things like that. So I think that's maybe something we should talk about as, is it a feature? Is it a benefit? Is it something that every Women in Digital program should have as a leadership development component or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think if anything, we were just focused on even just having conversations and not letting it, get dust on it. How do we have more conversations? And so, and then I don't know, Kimberly, I remember I probably caught you at a weak moment to say, hey, Kimberly, because I was drowning. But what brought you to saying yes to lead our leadership, our digital leadership?
Well, it's interesting because prior to you asking me, I was in an industry vertical and I was talking to some of my colleagues and I was like, I've met some really interesting women within different companies, different clients. And I was like, it would be really cool to actually have events where we bring those women together because I think they feel isolated.
Wow.
And to some extent, I felt isolated because all the people in my role were all men. And so then when you go to see a woman and then you realize you connect on so many different levels and you have so many different life experiences like you're talking about, right? Starting a family, having kids, and like you've all kind of had some exposure to that. And so we started doing the dinners before they had to be virtual, right? And we started doing those in the different cities. And then Lois was like, so would you like to run it?
You're like, I thought it was just dinners.
Exactly. But it's always been something I've been passionate about, about getting women together and building our network and also supporting people, right, who are coming up because a lot of us didn't have that, right, when we were younger.
Yeah. I mean, you said something that's just sticking with me, moving from isolated to related. And that's pretty powerful, just having that connection. And, Brene Brown talks about belonging somewhere versus having to fit in. So you truly can have that support system you're talking about. And I don't want to say empowered, I feel like it's somewhat overused, but encouraged at times when you have things that only someone who's gone through something like that can understand.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting what someone on our Women in Digital team, I forget the topic, but we were starting our where we connect folks, right? Especially new women who join the firm. And she said, she goes, after I joined, I think she said it was 9 months before she actually talked to another woman in ISG, which is shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, holy cow.
But I wonder if it's abnormal. It is kind of wow. But is that normal? Like, I wonder if that's the same thing that would happen in Lisa's experience or, in any other company.
Yeah. Lisa, what was it like joining a new company? And
it's been a whirlwind, I'll tell you. So this kind of falls into, and you guys have said a whole bunch of things that I've been making note of that I want to respond to. But when I first joined, the first thing that I was asked to do, I was actually asked to do it when I was still with ISG, is to moderate a Women in Digital Utilities roundtable discussion.
Ooh, utilities.
So then
wow.
when I I joined LTI and they said, okay, well, now do it for us. And the first thing that I asked was, okay, well, can you tell me what's the name of your Women in Tech, Women in Digital, whatever it is, what's your women's program? And it was crickets. And in the spirit of be afraid what you ask, so Sudhir, who Lois, you met, he said, we don't have one, but Lisa, why don't you start it? You can't just, like, I've been there for a week, right? So, okay. And I mean, you guys know me from ISG. I'm not like that out in front of the public person. I'm, pretty happy doing my own thing.
I think we did talk about this within your first month at LTI, didn't we?
Yes.
At a happy hour between ISG and LTI in Texas. And the great thing is that you were given a platform and an expectation to do it. Not that that's a distraction or do we really need that? Or so that does say something about, your leadership and the desire is there, but not knowing what you don't know and then you realize it, we need it. How do you do it? Like, what was your first step, Kimberly? Step one, what do I do?
Step one was call Lois. and Kimberly. So that was my step one, was how did you guys do it? And I'll tell you, it was very interesting. So, being at a much larger company, right? It's a very different type of experience than it is being with ISG, because we've got 40,000+ LTItes globally. And so there were so many of the things that you guys pointed out that were just so critical. One is make sure you're aligned on what your objective is. Make it super focused and make it really clear. So that is something that we did. And then start small. Start with a core team, a small team with a small number of programs so that you can really start gaining some momentum. Sudhir, who's our president of sales, he is our executive sponsor. So I interviewed him to launch the program internally, which, gives tremendous amount of credence to the importance that our senior leadership sees in the program. Make it all inclusive. So if there's anything that I would do over again, I would have been more mindful about what to name it. So our program is called Women in Tech. And the first thing people, men think is this is a woman's program. So I would have probably been more mindful about naming it something that is much more inclusive. So you can't, so our charter is to support, mentor, and encourage women to achieve greater things in the technology community. That's it. You can't do that with just women. It requires the entire ecosystem to make that happen. So that's been our little bit of a challenge, is to get my male colleagues within LTI to kind of join the bandwagon that they need to do this to make this successful.
Yeah. It's so interesting because before joining ISG, this is the smallest company I've worked for too. And there are so many benefits to that, and I love it. But I came from market and industry supporting chief product and technology officers, CIOs as HR business partners in healthcare and life sciences, and was at a major health insurance company in the Mid-South. And I helped to stand up other affinity types of groups, like a veterans network resource group. Right. And so internally, you could have all these different internal focuses and goals, but you also are using that as a way to get good intel for customer and consumer experiences. So did you think through any of those types of things in terms of when you set those aligned objectives? And then the number one thing that was critical was the sponsorship. You had sponsorship organically, right? But what you're talking about now is advocacy. And I think that is a key component, but that doesn't just happen naturally, right? So how do you get allies and advocates, people who are not the end users or consumers of the Women in Digital group, but people who can help expand it and evolve it and grow it and mentor as advocates and allies. That's very interesting.
So one of the things too and this is the same in ISG as it is, I think, in any company, just because LTI didn't have a formally global program, it isn't that there weren't things or aren't things that are happening at the regional level, and some fantastic things and tremendous accolades by some of our female leaders. And so part of it has been you finding the right channel, which I have found marketing is your best friend. The marketing department is your best friend because they've got their finger on the pulse of what's happening everywhere, because everybody goes to marketing to say, hey, can you help me with this thing? So getting that connection with marketing, who can then say, oh, there's this luncheon that's happening, or so-and-so just got awarded for being, the top 100 women in Asia. And so how do we take all those great things that are happening and bring it under one umbrella to really, kind of applaud everything that's already been happening? So that's been another kind of big learning for me as well, is to really acknowledge all of the stuff that's happening every day.
That's great.
I've also found it was kind of interesting, and I'd like to get your perspective on this. With some of the roundtable discussions that I've had with CIOs, and I've done two now, one was with utilities and the second was with insurance, they wanted the women in tech to be a thread, but not to be the topic. They wanted to be able to talk about, business-related topics. And then we just kept, as part of our discussion, at the very end was when we talked about, one topic, right, about a woman's topic. And so I found that very interesting, that they really wanted it to not be the focus.
Well, when we started our dinners, I think that was a learning, because you're right, so you have a topic for the dinner. And I think what we were realizing the more dinners we had is, first of all, there's a topic that you're going to bring to the dinner, which is not a women's topic. It's whatever a topic of the day is. But what was great about having a dinner with women from different companies, coming together, was how we approached the topic, how we conversed about the topic. It was a very different way that we had a dialogue or shared stories, or, it was a little bit more, we could take down some of the, how we believe we're supposed to be acting or discussing something when you're in a larger forum, like at an event. It was much more kind of an intimate sort of environment where you could just really talk about, how you felt about it, or what really you felt good about. It seemed to be a way that women enjoy talking about something, or are comfortable talking about something. And that in itself, I think, built a lot of, positive reinforcement as well as connections. And, I think that was something that we learned that was an added benefit, that, you don't know, it's not just to talk about what can we do as women, but it's also just have a space to go where, you can really connect with other people in a way that, we all have probably a common thread as to how we like to interact. So I thought that was a really great byproduct of those dinners, which too bad we can't have those anymore, or we could probably start, but it was a great forum to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question about the next generation charge of STEM, girls who code. How do we think about partnering and working with, collectively? Maybe it's a pipeline for getting interns, or, new grads, or, any thoughts about what Women in Digital can do, or how to get the doors open and just get women even more interested before they're women?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. one of the things that we've done this year, and it's not exactly what you're talking about, but I can see it expanding there, is we've gotten involved with our talent management team, right? And so we push out the open opportunities in our networks, right? Because we're networked with a lot of women. And then we participate in the hiring process, right? So that when someone comes in, they're interviewing with a woman, and it's not just a panel of people that, maybe they can't relate to.
Oh, that's good. Yes.
And then when women come on board, so we don't have the issue where someone's with us for 7 months before they talk to a woman, we make sure we've got a group of women that reach out to all the new hires and say, welcome to ISG. We've got this program. Here are the things we're doing. We'd love for you to be involved in any capacity. You can join the LinkedIn site. You can actually run a program, like you can participate in the programs. And I think what you're talking about is kind of the next step to a program like that, where we start looking for, can we create internships, right? How can we create programs where we involve women at an earlier age? One thing we did do is we did hire our first intern this year, and it was a young woman out of India, and she was great. But it's not a program. I wouldn't call it, something. Yeah. It's something that we need to institutionalize, if you will.
Yeah.
But it was a first step.
But I think that, my daughter's just going, she's looking at colleges. And one of the things that impressed her when she was doing a college visit was they said they bring in, she's in engineering, or she wants to go into engineering. They bring people who are working in the different fields to come talk to them as freshmen. So as they get towards the end of their freshman year, people come in to talk about what they actually do in their real job. Just, how do you take what you're learning, and is that something that I really want to do? I think it would be actually interesting to have that, not necessarily, one, it could be recruiting for us as a firm, but, to talk to women who are in the business world, who are doing some of the things that you might be thinking about. And it just, think of the seeds that you're planting in their head about what they could do.
Yeah.
Right. What does life really look like when you have a job that, you might be running a project? What does that look like? I don't, what do you do? Do you actually go for business meetings and for dinner? You just talk about what it's like as a working woman and in the field that they're interested. I think it's just a great way to help encourage and shepherd and, maybe even build a mentoring relationship that lasts a long time.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. There is a relationship that has been established with LTI Canada and Ryerson University. They have their, I think it's Women in Technology Management program. And they reached out, and they do it every year. They interview one person a day for their Whittam Week. And they wanted to talk to people who ended up in a technology field, who didn't start in a technology field. And it was kind of interesting because they reached out to me, and I said, well, that's not me. My degree is in computer science, and I've been in IT my entire career. And it was so funny because they said, not to be, harsh or anything, but you're old. And if you think about when I graduated university with an IT degree, 5-year-olds have more technical expertise than I did when I graduated university. So they said, we still want to interview. We want you to be part of the program. The point is that they have this fantastic mentoring program. And they do that. They bring in people who are working in their careers to talk to this. And it was LinkedIn Live, which I'd never done before either.
Yes.
And just to talk to, it was Instagram Live.
Yes.
Whatever that's called. And it was the funniest thing. These two, college seniors who are trying to educate me on how to do this Instagram Live thing.
I saw something on Instagram, and my page is very boring too. It's like, oh, that Agile meme was so funny. But there was this group called Baddies in Tech, and it was like, oh, like I'm a can't really say the word, but like I'm a bad boss. It was a brand that young girls could see themselves aspiring into, not, I just, put on my headphones and I only code. Like, what are the other things that I can do? So I was just really curious about that, back to, Kimberly's first point about isolation to relatedness, and what better way than to be able to see yourself and start seeing different options in digital. And that's incredible.
I think we really have a tremendous opportunity to look at our world through the eyes of our young people.
Yeah.
So my oldest daughter is a night and day different from me. She's super artistic and she wants to, she interviews, every other week because she's never satisfied. And she just is, she's very gypsy kind of like, but she has a very, very different perspective on life and inclusion and free time versus working. And so I have really found myself, and I talked to her about this when we were together over Thanksgiving, and she was really stunned. But I said, Andrea, I think about how you would respond to a situation as opposed to how I would respond to a situation to try to temper how I am looking at things, because we've got so many generations that are in the workforce now, and I'm sure we're more than 50% millennials or younger, right? So I think that there's a lot we can learn from that youth generation.
I think that's a great idea. And it's also a way to, I think we also have a role as women in our respective companies as we all struggle with the Great Resignation and the fact that there's a higher caliber of our expectations of what work and life and everything together means. I mean, and I think it's because there's so many more young people within the working environment that has a different expectation. But, instead of fighting it, I feel like my mother, but instead of fighting it, something that I would love to your point, what do they think? Like, what is a good relationship between work and personal time, and how do you see yourself being most creative or being able to really think about what you're doing and it means a lot to you and it's something that you want to achieve. That can be an influence within both of our and all of our companies as to how we can create an environment that's more conducive and probably supportive of all of us in a better way. And why not women take a role in making that happen? I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well.
I think that the change that has happened with the work from home, hybrid work, working all different hours, which so many people had to do with COVID, right? With having kids at home that you're now having to pay attention to because they're not in school, right? So you have to shift your work schedule. I really hope that continues to be a real pivot point for women, because I remember when I was having children and thinking it would be great if I could just work part-time, but I don't want like a fluffy part-time. I want like a real job.
Yeah, meaty.
And it didn't really exist then. And I'm really hoping that, I know we've got this now with the gig economy, right? That has become a whole different thing.
Yes, for sure.
And I listened to the podcast where, the new small businesses has just exploded, right, since COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really hoping that companies, big companies, look at it to really value the importance of everybody in the workforce and those that may just want to be able to work 10 or 20 hours a week.
I love this. It's like the next generation of women in digital. What does that look like? And how do you help to usher that in and pave the way, in the timeline and the journey? So I've heard like 7 different key topics, or maybe things that if you want to start a Women in Digital group, you should be thinking about. Gaining sponsorship. Number 1, you don't want to fight against something that's not supported. And then with that, looking for alignment with your goals and your objectives so you can find the right advocates or, allies, advocacy. Starting small core team, growing, looking for, I just called it pockets of goodness. There's probably stuff already happening or going on, or women already doing something, and really leaning into that. Connecting with marketing and sales and those creative design types, and really creating something that's powerful and meaningful in a campaign or a visual identity that sticks and resonates. acknowledging what's happening on a regular basis, not necessarily waiting for a big event or a big dinner. And then partnering with your talent management, so you can think about internally, this is a benefit that you're adding to your organization for the entire human capital life cycle, the entire hire to retire. What does that look like as a woman in digital in that experience? And then what does the next generation need, and how are we kind of leaving a legacy?
So I would say one other thing, Missy, that was especially important in my starting this program, because I was so new to the company, but that is understanding your corporate culture.
You know, that's a whole nother episode.
Right. I work for an Indian heritage company, right? And we're some really, really, really large percent of Indian. And that's globally. They're, in the US and in Europe, and they're still Indian. And the culture matters in terms of how you look to roll out a program.
That's a really, really good point.
The only thing I was going to add is I think when you look at building that core team, I wanted to add to that you look for a mixture of skills, right? And that'll come in the form of levels of management, age, it could be geography, right? If you're geographically, dispersed.
That's great.
And it could be, like you're talking about sales, marketing, delivery, people who experience a different work life, right? So I think that's also very important.
Hey, Lois.
Hey, what did you think? I thought that was really fun.
It was great to hear everybody's input. Lisa was hilarious. I thought she was so funny.
She was great.
And Missy is a natural panel leader, as far as I can tell. She's like, we love having her on board because she just totally rocked it. So I love that.
Yeah, Missy did great. You're right. I'm so excited for this season to do these podcasts with Missy, because she's just going to bring so much. But it was so much fun to be on the show with, 3 other women who are just passionate about things. We've all got our point of views. We've all spent a lot of time, working and experiencing things, and bringing some of that to bear was just a lot of fun. And I'm hoping we can do that again. We got to do more of those.
Honestly, I know. I think more panels, but I'm going to have Missy run them all. I'll just be in the background. But I also love the fact that she brought up the fact that there's a lot of organizations out there, and this is my passion, is like getting more girls involved in tech, and like you mentioned, girls who code, and how do you develop a pipeline to bring in women in, not just at at the level of our work, but way down the line. The pipeline has to start earlier. So I was really excited about that. That was a cool conversation.
It was. And, I think there was so many great ideas that we brought up, and to that point, in fact, I was afterwards, and this is a conversation that I had with another colleague, another great woman in our firm. And we were talking about how we do some of those things, or how we need to really expand the women that we talk to, because she has friends who are educators, or they're working for a governmental agency, or they're working in, completely different areas. And so, for us to bring women of all different backgrounds, of all different roles that they're playing today, and bring those points of view together and have these kinds of dialogues, it really enriches the conversation, and it really helps us think, what could we do differently that may impact many different, from, in the school system all the way to, what we can do for women in different industries. It's just, it's exciting to think about the possibilities.
It really was. And what I also liked, because it was such a wide-ranging conversation and talking about bringing women in, what we can expect from younger women. But what I loved that I really felt like really shone for me, because, when we talk about creativity, everybody thinks, artists and stuff. I feel like this is a really creative output for us to look at for women. Like, let's push our management to say, hey, how can we be creative to bring more women in, and how can they show their creative side? And that was like, I always have felt like I'm not an artist. I'm a geek, but I think it's so creative, and I love having conversations about how we can be creative in this space. So I thought that was sort of an interesting beginning of that conversation.
Yep. And our work that we do both in our company or any of us who do in our respective companies, we can really be leaders. I don't think any of us, no matter who we work for, there's not only is it culturally the right thing for companies to do to promote women in tech, but it's also, it adds so much value. And, everybody has daughters and wives and sisters. And, it's something where we can really stand up and be leaders. We see what's happening. We have now's the time. I think I've said that a few times. Now's the time to really make a difference and bring our talents. It's not about how, others would have done in the past. It's really what we see and what creativity and what ideas we can bring to the table. And, it's empowering, but it's also just fun. It's fun to unleash.
Well, I think that's the part that I really felt like after this thing. It was a fun thing. But I have to say, Missy summarized, she came up with like 10. She says, I have about 7 points. She had like 10. Like, here's all the things you need to do. You guys, if you listen to it, I don't need to repeat it. But I think my final takeaway is culture matters. That was kind of what you all kind of decided on. And I really think that should be our takeaway for this one, is that culture matters. And how do you change the culture to actually embrace the women and support women in the workplace and support and get our allies and everybody, it should be a creative endeavor for everybody. So that's my final takeaway. So.
Well, maybe that's a trend for the year. Maybe 2022, our podcast should be around how do we change the culture. I like it. You might be onto something.
Well, there you go. That's what I'm here for. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and welcome to 2022. And we'll see what happens.
See you, Jeannie.
Thanks for listening. If you like our podcast, please subscribe and rate and review us. Thank you.